Today on Rebuilders, we have a guest with us. Who is the guest today, Mark?
The guest is Trudi Sayers, who's going to be sharing her story. We know many of you have prayed this year and supported us. And in the background of Rebuilders this year has been the story of Trudi's journey with cancer. So we are really privileged to have her sharing with us what she learned as a leader. What is it to be a leader who's suffering in the midst of something like this? And get your tissues.
Let's get into it. Welcome to Rebuilders. My name is Lydia and I'm here with Mark and Daniel. How are you both today?
I'm very well because it's now Christmas season.
Yeah.
It's December. Yeah. I'm allowing it. And so I'm jolly and festive.
And hot. It's hot today. And that's probably strange for many of our Northern Hemispherian listeners because you're used to winter, but down under, it's summer and it's hot.
Brilliant.
Down under?
Brilliant.
Down under.
I have so many good memories of just hot Christmases, barbecues, little wading pools in the backyard.
Yeah.
Cricket.
We used to have water fights in my grandparents' orchard.
Yeah.
But we do strange things. Like we still maintain some of the British traditions of like roasting food and puddings and, all that sort of stuff. And
Pavlovas.
Bird update.
Yes, the Bird Hotel. How's it going?
The two turtle doves.
Yeah. The bird is departed. So it's exited
no more
and
partridge
returning
in a
to its family for So those of you just joining us, I had a bird make home in my letterbox, and it's quite annoying because you'd have parcels and stuff come in, but it's gone now. So our listeners can rest easy.
They could do a security check on the parcels.
We could get a live. Can you set up a live
camera?
A live camera in my letterbox?
No.
Okay.
They've got a live camera for some,
I feel like we've got
for some birds somewhere in Melbourne.
Oh yeah, there's a skyscraper and there's an eagle or hawk up top of one of the skyscrapers in Melbourne, and there's a live cam. You can look at it. Yeah.
I mean, it could be just as popular.
If I get 500 signatures to do it, then I'll set it up.
I can tell you that the Red Church budget does not allow for it, so you have to fund it yourself.
Out of my own pocket. Okay, I'll think about it.
Oh, partridge cam.
Did you ever have any encounters with animals as kids? What was your...
Are you referring to what we were talking about earlier?
I'm
about snakes?
Yeah, I'm a city kid and you're a country kid, so it's a lot more exciting. I'm dealing with like birds, you know.
Yeah, we had snakes living under our house.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I actually never saw them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a snake as a kid?
Like maybe once or twice.
Okay.
But I've actually seen more snakes since I've lived in Melbourne than
I've never
at the
seen
zoo.
Yeah.
I've seen them at the zoo.
Reptile house.
Well, when I say since moving to Melbourne, I would say I've seen the snakes regionally.
Yeah.
But I was
More
living in Melbourne at the time. But I have seen them in like metropolitan Melbourne,
So sort of
along
bushy
the Mary Creek
parks and stuff.
Trail. Yeah.
Interesting. What about you, Daniel? Childhood
it was
memories.
a staple. It was part of life growing up on a farm.
Wow.
I literally have memories of like getting ready for school in the morning and my mum like coming out in her dressing gown or bathrobe with a shotgun.
That's amazing.
Go kill a snake in the backyard or something.
That's fantastic.
Good on you, mum.
Now, so I grew up with memories of like at Christmas of roast chicken and roast turkey. Is snake nice as a Christmas meal?
We'd cut them and use them as stockings. Too far?
No, that's great.
No.
Love it.
Wow.
Yeah. All right, we should.
Christmas tradition.
I could actually do it like a few episodes on like my nature
experiences.
Experiences growing up. Yeah.
Well, another side podcast.
Another side podcast.
This list is getting
crocodile
long.
hunter, snake hunter, Daniel.
Goodness me. Yes, Merry Christmas to you all. Yeah. Thank you for joining us for today. We actually have a special guest, Trudi Sayers. It is such a pleasure to have you here with us today on Rebuilders. For those of you who have tracked with us this year, you will have actually heard Trudi on the podcast back in February with Brian Heasley with our special with 24/7 prayer, where we heard about what was happening with prayer around the world. Trudi is the National Director for 24/7 Prayer in Australia, alongside working here at Red Church, and you're also a very dear friend. So we have shared a little bit throughout the year about a health crisis that you have experienced, and obviously Mark, as your husband, he's walked alongside you. So thank you to the listeners who have prayed and checked in along the way. Trudi, if you can give us just a really quick health update, how are you going?
Yep, I'd love to. Yes, praise the Lord, I'm going really well. I finished chemotherapy on the 5th of September, was my last round, and since then I'm going from strength to strength, recovering from the fatigue that chemotherapy brings. So alongside that, I had 2 targeted drugs, and I'll continue on those. They, hopefully, God willing, will keep the cancer at bay. So I'll stay on those. All the scans I had following my chemotherapy were all excellent and really positive, didn't show any active cancer. So effectively it's all dormant. So praise the Lord.
That's
absolutely.
So
yeah. Amen.
And I just want to thank you to all the Rebuilders listeners as well. Like you guys, I know Mark's already thanked, but it's my opportunity to say thanks as well for praying and cheering us on through this.
Yeah. Well, we are so deeply overjoyed that you're here, that you're healthy, and that you're able to share with us today. We don't have you on necessarily to give a health update, but we have you on. We're a podcast that we speak to leaders. We encourage leaders across the world, whether it's deep diving into some cultural things that are going on and how they filter down into churches and organizations and help us understand how to lead. We also talk about what it looks like to lead towards renewal and how God shapes leaders. Yeah. And we know that this journey, as we've traveled along with you, has been significant in shaping you as a leader. Yes. God has done amazing work in you. So your testimony, we know, will provide encouragement and inspiration to so many people out there. Yeah. What it looks like to lead through suffering, what it looks like to partner with God and depend on Him when you don't have much else.
Yes.
So Trudi, we would love to hear from you, and also Mark. You are very much present throughout the entire thing, and I know that you've also learnt a lot about leading through this whole process as well. So we're going to talk about that today. So I'm going to let you guys start. Maybe back at that point where the diagnosis was received back in May.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where was it at? What was the experience? And how did God lead you?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think we can, speaking on behalf of us, I think it had been, and listeners will sort of, I guess, hear the echoes of parts of this story. It'd been a tough time, we started this podcast in COVID, and, sort of Melbourne, really, it was hard to do church for 2 years in the way that you normally did. And then sort of, rebuilding after that was difficult, going through, leadership backlash, all kinds of things. It's been such a tough time. Yes. And I think just before this happened, we were at a moment of real tiredness and sort of battle weariness, and excited about what God was doing. And I think, the year began with, echoes of renewal and outpourings. And it was this strange combination of an exciting time, seeing God move, something we'd really hoped for a long time. But then at the same time, just really tough dynamics, leadership dynamics, church dynamics. And, I'd gone to the leadership conference, so that's where I was. And we can tell that part of the story when I learnt this news in London. But just had a real sense, literally in the 10 minutes before I found the news, that perhaps we're about to turn a corner and move out of a difficult period. So I think for both of us, it was just like, oh my goodness, this has come at a moment when you already feel beat. But I know for you, Trudi, you had been praying as well for God to use you in a particular way.
I think it's sometimes when you look back and you reflect that you realise how God had been working, and even the ways He potentially was preparing you for preparing me for this. I have to just tell a little little story, and sometimes the prayers you pray are like important prayers, and I have to say always our prayers are important. Actually, I should clarify that. But I remember just really desperate to just have some time to just, go have some time, an afternoon or whatever, a retreat to just go and pray. And just it was actually in January, and I like to do that, particularly in the new year, to seek God and hear from Him. And I actually drove up to the mountain near us. So it's probably about a half an hour drive, and I just remember just. The Lord just ministered to me, and as Mark said, we'd been going through some hard time, and as I was coming down the mountain, I was listening to this worship song. It's called Refiner, and the words are like, "I want to be tried by fire, purified. I want to burn for you, only for you." And I just remembered that song just kept resonating, and when it just I kept singing that over and over as I'd go for walks and even just wanting to press into renewal. That was our heart. We kept leaning into that. And so I look back on that time, I'm like, was that a costly prayer I prayed? I want to be tried by fire. But I look back now and just there's these different moments of preparation. Yeah.
Well, even I reflect, in some ways, hearing the news in England would sound like a nightmare scenario. But weirdly, I look back now, and when you're a leader and you go through something like this, even when you go through something like this, people are still watching you lead. And I think if I'd received the news here, I knew that, you're not on display is the wrong word, but, it's different when you're in your context leading. And so weirdly, I remember hearing the news, I felt very far away, and it was also coronation weekend, so I couldn't get back because it's just every flight to Australia was, sort of booked. And I had to hang around in the UK for a few more days, but just God used that. Some of my friends in the UK, and I think about Brian Heasley came and met with me from 24/7 Prayer and sat with me at the station, and the guys from KXC were amazing, and I was in Oxford St Aldate's, and those guys so it was just this weird moment of not having to lead but be ministered to, which is not normal when you're a leader. You so often do it in the pastoring. So I think in some ways God allowed me to sort of process with Him a bit. So yet again, this strange way we felt looking back, prepared. God was going ahead.
Yeah. I think another interesting way the Lord prepared me or went before me. And as I say, I think I'm really careful to say I just the Lord, you sometimes think with cancer and illness, I think I just want to say I know God was in control, I don't believe He caused it, but He is in control. And I think that's the thing and He went before me. And so I remember I've shared this in my testimony, when I shared at Red and at the 24/7 gathering, there was this really key moment the Sunday before I got the initial diagnosis. It was during our Red Church service, and it was in worship, and I just had this really profound encounter. And during worship, we were singing the song "Since Your Love." It's called "In You," and the line is "In You is all we need. You're my life, you're my breath, you're my everything." And I just remember just experiencing the Holy Spirit, and I was weeping. And I remember I shared with the church this kind of encouragement, what would it look like to be a people where Jesus is all we need. And I look back on that moment as well. Little did I know what the week ahead would bring. And then a couple of 4 days later, literally, I'm sitting in the doctor's office receiving this diagnosis. And then later that afternoon, having to have a urgent PET scan and moving slowly through the machine and saying that line as a breath prayer, it came back to me. In you is all I need. And just really that time of just being utterly dependent, where everything is stripped away, realizing Jesus is all I need. And so I look back on that encounter. That was the Lord preparing me a week before. So I think my testimony is that time and time again, the Lord met me. He went before me. He just, even things like that initial hearing that diagnosis, as we say, Mark was in the UK, he was in London. I'm like, how do I even tell Mark? How do I even and when and how, like what's the timing. I knew he had some speaking arrangements and I didn't want to distract all that, like what God was doing there. So I just even had to commit that, the timing of when to share that with Mark. And even the Lord went before me with that, and just the timing worked out well, how to tell the kids, even like the Holy Spirit gave me insight of the best approach with that. So really that is my testimony. Like he met me on each of those occasions. He even gave me promises like Bible verses before I'd go into the doctor's office that really have stayed true. I've continued to pray and hold them. And yes, I'll stop there for now. Yeah.
So listening to those reflections, there's this surrender that has to happen, and we hear that as leaders, to surrender, to give everything to God. What's some more things about that you learned, like in the surrender of yourself to Jesus?
Well, I think for me, like hearing, as I said, we're going through this really difficult time as it was, and that sort of sense of like, I think I'm out of this now. Like I remember clearly, like one of the things that really ignited my passion for, renewal and revival was reading Martin Lloyd-Jones' book, Revival. And then I remember us praying together in 2018, Trudi and I. So we went around London and prayed to these different sites where God had moved. And we were walking past Martin Lloyd-Jones' church and us praying out the front, like it was all shut and we were just praying. And then being back there and actually, speaking in that pulpit where he preached, I just thought, this is an amazing moment. And it felt like this signal of, we're emerging out. So then hearing the news literally on the platform of the tube and then thinking, oh my goodness. And at that time I was like, we're hoping it hasn't spread.
Yeah.
I remember we flew back, I flew back in and you get off that 24-hour flight and it's bad enough when you're just trying to deal with jet lag. But I remember sitting we're sitting with the specialist and, then her explaining, no, it has spread and it spread, further, which is probably, we thought at first it was the lymph nodes and actually spread to look like a spot on the spine. And then I think, it's like a second crashing down of your world because you sort of all of a sudden realize like, oh, wow, this is really serious. And, in my head, I was like, best case scenario, there's a tumor, we can cut it out and move on. And, but no, I was like, no, this is now, we're in the really serious place here. Yeah. And, I think for me, and I know you went through this, Trudi, I'll let you speak to you, but I think it was just like, I find in ministry and leadership, there's often these moments of, will you keep going? There's like the call seems to come again and again. And it's sort of like, okay, so the call came when it was tough and you're dealing with some tough stuff in church. But will you keep going if it's this, and then there was almost like, will you keep going if it's cancer? And there was a second thing, will you keep going if it's now a much more serious form of metastatic cancer that's spread? And, I think for me, I began to realize like, oh, wow, what if I lose her? Will you keep going? So all of a sudden you go into these like immense questions, but they're all intertwined into your call. And so, I found the only place you can sort of go is surrender. Do you know what I mean? Like you either go, so I'm out now, but what are you out to? You're just out to like, well, I'll suffer just by myself, and I don't want to, I know certain people probably get to certain moments where like, I need to take some time out. But I think it was sort of like another surrender to like, I'm going to go forward, God, even if my life looks nothing like I thought it was. And I think at those moments, the little payoffs you're expecting, like, I've been through an absolutely horrendous time, but I kept going for you. So now I don't know, what am I expecting? Like, okay, you're not expecting like some prosperity gospel Lamborghini, but maybe you're sort of expecting things to be trouble free.
Yeah, like a reprieve for a few months or something.
Yeah. And then he's like, oh man, it's not, but I know for you it was.
I'm going to get emotional now too.
It's all right.
It's
So
okay.
often happens on Revealed.
Okay, good. I didn't think to bring the tissues. I don't know why, but anyway.
Oh, we always have them in here because I've cried that many times on this podcast.
I'll have it just in case. For me, I remember, hearing that initial news, like as I go, takes me back to that moment in the doctor's office and hearing that the tumor, that I didn't think was anything was actually cancerous. And I remember it's just that feeling of you are utterly out of control. That's before I'd even known it was spread. It was just, and I remember thinking, I have to tell Mark this after all he's, been through and the kids and just like, I have to clear all my appointment, everything, like any plans that I had for the coming year are just completely gone. And so suddenly you just realize, like, I think in that moment, like it is there's a choice element, but there's also you're not choosing, you are out of control. So like all I really had, the only really choice I feel like I had was to lean into God and trust for him to walk it out. And it did help that I did get this Bible verse before that was the Lord promised to go before me. He won't leave me or forsake me. And so I like, okay, God, you've given me this verse. You've given me this promise. You will go before me. So that was kind of that first moment of surrender. And then, that afternoon, as I said, I was in a PET scan and, you have to wait you get like injected with this sort of glucosey substance or something, you have to wait around. So a lot of time you just spent waiting. I was in a room on my own and I just, had that conversation with Jesus and just said, who are you going to be for me in this season? And I just knew I was going into it, and I just wanted to go with him. And I just really sensed the whisper of the Spirit saying, I'm your suffering servant. And I just knew he was there to walk with me and serve me in this time of suffering. And I just remember going, praying. I can't remember, it was just thinking prayer or speaking out loud, but I just remember really surrendering to wanting this to count for his kingdom purposes. And just, if I've got to go through this, I've got no choice, God, just use it. Just use it. We all want our lives to be, used for his glory, for his purpose. And that was just my prayer of surrender, just make it count. If I've got to go through it, it may as well be worth something. And I think the other thing that I can say is that through what Mark and I, either individually in our own lives or and faith journey or just together of what we've been through, we've seen God's faithfulness in other seasons, and that enabled me. It is that classic, his faithfulness in other seasons prepares you for faith for the next season.
Yes.
And so I can honestly say that God has met me in the past, and I think it was that kind of willingness to surrender to what he would do through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I think too, I remember watching Trudi going through that surrender process. I think there was an element where I was going through it and watching her, you see these levels of authority and spiritual deepening happening at just this incredible rate, because either it's often I think there's formation, we talk a lot about formation and practices and forming over a long time. And, there's been a lot of, I've talked about that. Lots of people talk about that. But I think in these moments, it's not cancer happens and you're going to do slow formational processes. It's either you're going to fight this or you're going to accept and continue to follow God in it. So within days, just things spiritually change. The spiritual atmosphere in our house changed within, 48, 72 hours. And I think for me, I'd been carrying, I think, a lot of hurt. I remember we did this podcast I'd read, I think it's Heifetz and Linsky's book, I think it is, about, backlash and leadership backlash and how often, when you're growing, people target the messenger, and interestingly, not long after we recorded that, I very much experienced that, myself, and I was carrying a lot of hurt. And, I think it's the enemy will sometimes sort of send these Exocet missiles, which are almost aimed for your heart, and they can do this damage. And I think for leaders, how you carry hurt and go through forgiveness is really key, because it's like a slow release poison. And I remember like I was just been wrestling with that, and why God has this happen? I'm carrying this hurt and stuff like this, and I was holding that. And then I remember us sitting there at breakfast, or the kids had left of school, and we're sort of cleaning up after breakfast. And I remember Trudi saying, she's literally outwardly processing what she just shared with you. But, I'll never forget, she said to me, I'm willing to, if God has to take my life, not that, saying God's taking a life, but if I pass and that furthers, and I want that to be used for the renewal that God's bringing in the world. And, I remember just standing there staggered, and for me, it actually weirdly undid some of the hurt. I think, I'd been carrying this hurt because I felt like for a long time sort of trying to push and cry out for, renewal, and you feel sometimes you're sort of going up against the and people have been critical about that, and, I'd copped, I don't talk about heaps here, but copped it, which I think is an Australianism. Is that an Australianism? Copped it. Which means, you'd received negative, backlash because you're pushing into renewal. I remember, I wrote a book called Facing Leviathan about, I wanted to share about what is to lead with a mental health diagnosis. And I wrote that book a number of years ago when I'd been diagnosed with bipolarity. And it was, when I was about to publish on that book, I remember saying to Trudi, I can't send this. I don't want the world to know this. But we just felt like there are people out there who've got their own mental health diagnoses. That doesn't preclude you from leadership. And, that book has gone out and helped people. But I remember someone then, basically sort of said something, like Mark's interest in renewal is effectively because he's mentally unwell. And it was just like a poison arrow to your heart. But in that moment when Trudi said that, I felt she was leading me. And, I've been in ministry longer than Trudi. And so, often there's sort of like this journey we've gone on together. But at that moment, there were literally moments where Trudi was leading me as her example was sort of just saint-like in our own home. And that saint-likeness, the access point was through surrender, which I saw. She surrendered to God's will, whether that was a result like we've received, or whether that was not a result like we've received.
Yeah, so significant. And sort of semi-bystanders, it was profound to see the significance of that and how it impacted both of you, but it has impacted us as a team and has impacted our church. So thank you. And I think something that I was thinking about as you were just sharing that part about surrender is, I know that both of you talked about what posture, like asking God about what posture we need to take in order to make our way through this. And I think that's actually really helpful for listeners to hear in terms of, as leaders, when you are facing suffering in many forms, whether it's health or leadership backlash stuff, or, whatever other circumstances you might be facing, I don't know, civil war perhaps, what seeking God on a posture to take as you go through it.
Yeah, that was one of the early prayers that we prayed, wasn't it? Like, how do we posture ourselves? We're asking God, how do we posture for hope in this scenario? I think, thankfully, we have had like great medical hope as well, right from the start. So there's always we have been in that position, which has been such a blessing. And so we've got medical hope, but then obviously we've got God hope as well. And our prayer was that the medical would work to its effectiveness. But yeah, we just wanted to posture ourselves. Obviously, there's that kind of that the medical in the case of my diagnosis that the medical would work well, and I'd get to the state that I am today, like dormant, no active cancer. But there is still an ongoing posture we need to take because of the metastatic nature of the disease. In that the treatment, the drugs I need to stay on. We just don't know what's happening, at that kind of unseen level, microscopic level. And so there is still an element of trust and hope for the future. And that the treatment will continue to work. So we were having to reframe our perspective on life with with this new diagnosis. So and that will continue. But that's early on. I think that as we pray, God, how do we posture ourselves for hope? I think early on, part of the answer of prayer was that He reframed how we saw the diagnosis and how we saw living with this. So I'll keep speaking like in terms of it, and then you can add to it, perhaps, Mark. In terms of He had us. We've both been by. I think independently we're both reading Exodus, but we realised that soon on that I had a sense to be reading Exodus, and as was Mark, and and really the Lord spoke to us about daily manna, about really being present in the moment and living daily and receiving from Him. And we felt quite early on, we'd almost had this spiritual sense of not running ahead. To the future or worrying about the future, but just trying to live present in the moment and just the current. And I think one of the advice I actually even from a advice of just journeying even through the treatment of cancer that I had received from someone who I knew who'd gone through. So just chunk it and take one step at a time. And I think that is true of the Christian journey as well.
Yes.
Just chunk it, take one step at a how is God going to meet you in that next step and then next moment. And I think that has been quite an amazing shift of how I'm not worrying about the future. I think that's been a spiritual answer to prayer, a divine answer to prayer, of just the peace that He's brought that does pass understanding. How to just be present, to live with joy in the moment. Yeah. So I think, does that, did you want to add to
totally.
that?
Yeah. I think for me too, I felt what was revealed for me is assumptions that I made that I never really had thought about. But, all of a sudden when I remember coming out of the hospital, so Trudi had her first chemo treatment and reacted quite badly and ended up in hospital. And with, you sort of go from this thing where at first it just seems like some mental abstract. You've got this cancer diagnosis, but Trudi looks exactly the same. And then she begins treatment, and within days, we're at the hospital, and she just looks so sick and so unwell, and we're just really concerned at that moment. And I remember leaving the hospital late one night, and just sort of looking out and seeing this sort of apartment building, and sort of I remember looking, going, hang on, I thought my future, I just assumed my future as we sort of grow old together, and then going, hang on, maybe that's not me. And I sort of think, am I going to be in that little apartment up there? And all of a sudden it just came on me how I had assumed all these things about my future.
Yeah.
And that as believers, we can assume nothing. And I think that mention of Exodus is really key. I feel like we've entered into an Exodus space where you're living on daily manna, you're living on the quail, you're walking behind the pillar of fire and cloud. And it was a profoundly reshaping thing, I think you definitely do start to go, what was I worrying about? I think so many of our worries are based on things that are actually connected to our flesh. I'll let Trudi reflect on this, but Rob Reamer, who we've had on before, recommended reading Francis Fenelon's book Let Go. I just might get you to comment on that, Trudi, because it's an interesting reframing way of looking at our lives.
Yeah. I won't be able to explain it as well as the book, but essentially the things of our flesh that have not been put to death, that aspect of our flesh is actually the part that will experience the pain. So anything that is of our flesh that's still alive is what experiences the pain.
Wow.
So, it's quite a big concept, isn't it? So I think the more we surrender and allow the Holy Spirit to work in us, spiritually we can be prepared for what we go through. And I think that's what it means to kind of weather the storms of life and have our roots deep down. I think that's what that means.
Yeah.
And I think even like I remember like, I really felt the Lord, I was like, what do I do? And I think the church and board and all of you guys, people would have been supportive if I'd said, look, I need to take 3 months off. But I just felt God saying, I think I've always been privileged to be around people who are leaders above me who've helped me understand suffering. Had the real privilege of, working under, Alan Deb Hirsch, and Deb, was introduced me to the, Henry Nguyen's book, The Wounded Healer. Mm. And so that was always my framework of thinking about life and ministry. And, so I just really felt the Lord wanting me to keep preaching. So I kept preaching through this. And I remember like the first time I got up, it was this weird experience where I could see, like Trudi just got this diagnosis, the church is shocked, and Trudi was there for 1 week and then starts treatment and Trudi's not there, So you're standing at the front and we're normally down the front and the side there, and people, you see the leaders, the senior pastors down there. We're not there, and, they sort of feel this absence. And I remember getting up, but weirdly at that moment, I actually felt it was easy for me to get up than almost the audience to see me, because, and I remember like my first sermon, I could literally sort of at points here sort of weeping, because I think at that point I just didn't care. I think it those first sort of, 6, 7 sermons, sometimes you worry, am I landing here? What's that person over there up the back who looks bored? What are they thinking? All these things that go through your head. But I just remember it was just this incredible laser focus that you had of like, this is what this is about. This is what, God's doing. And this is really a heavenly reordering according to his priorities. And yeah, it's just fascinating because I think, there was little flesh at that moment I could hold on to. It was just like either full going forward in the Spirit with God, or you collapse in a heap. And just to add a little bit more about that posture, I think for us too, like we believe in healing. Yeah. We also believe that the kingdom's here but not here yet. Yeah. I know people have been miraculously healed. I know other people who haven't, and I've buried friends and been there when people have passed, and holding that together. So like, how do you hold this together? It was really hard in my head, but I felt God just say, live for hope. Yeah. And if on that journey through the desert, there is a tough moment, I'll be with you in that. Yeah. So we just felt like we had to posture for hope. We could fall in a complete heap and sort of pile ash, so there was almost like either you sort of go into some sort of denialism where you just pray hard enough, you'll be definitely healed, or then go fully goth or something, and Christian goth, and just like this is we're just going to fall into suffering. It was this felt this middle path with Jesus of we're going to hope for God, but we're going to trust Him if it's a different result than what we think. But we're going to posture for hope, and we want to model hope even in the midst of this. Yeah. Like, what does renewal look like even in the midst of this? And for listeners, I think God has used this profoundly. Like, we come to the end of the year. This Sunday just passed, we had, instead of a sermon, we just had a collection of testimonies. And I've never seen God work in a church in all my years of ministry like He has in our church. And weirdly, He's brought a really different kind of renewal, because I think somehow this has all played a part in this.
Yeah, well, that I guess kind of takes me to what I wanted to ask next. And when we were preparing for the 24/7 prayer national gathering that we had back in October, we had a series of videos of people who were using prayer rooms around Australia, well, mainly in Victoria, and they were just sharing their experiences of prayer rooms. And I showed it to you guys before the event was happening. And Trudi, I remember your response, and I saw you quite overwhelmed with emotion. You were just like, God has done all of this, even though I've not been present. And in that moment, I think what struck me was our leadership. As leaders, we don't necessarily need to be present or like physically whatever capable of doing something. Your leadership was your obedience, your surrender, and your posture of hope. Yeah, that was what led what was going on. Obviously, there were people on the ground who were doing work alongside it. Yeah, but your obedience was significant leadership, and it allowed God to do what he needed to do. So, I would love for you to reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that moment of just being so moved by the way the Lord just works beyond me. And early on, I had to, as part of all my roles, and that was huge. I just had to surrender 24/7 prayer to him as well. And actually, not just for the cancer diagnosis, I that is kind of my leadership posture at all times. I think is just I can't do the heavy lifting. I can't manufacture a prayer movement around Australia, so it's always going to be up to him. But even more so, even when I'm not present, to be working in the office and all those sort of things. But and I kind of part of my prayer is God, he knows it all. He knows that I've got this cancer diagnosis to live with, a new health thing to live with, appointments, all those sort of things. And so how do I my prayer is to God is just God, you have to do the heavy lifting. Whatever that looks like, just lead me. And I just want to be in step with his Spirit to kind of where are the opportunities that he brings forth, and just to be really in alignment, and he does the work. As I say, it's quite incredible, even the response we had of people coming around Australia to our gathering. Yeah. That's not my work. That was the Lord doing all that. I was really just putting a flag in the ground, and we just create the opportunity, but it is the Lord's work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it was that I reflected on what happened with Trudi was that, when you start, the job really is trying to start a prayer movement, an outpouring of prayer. And, we were sort of trying to tell people and I thought, look, I'm just going to put an Instagram post up because there's so many people we want to tell, and we were dealing with the diagnosis. So I just put up an Instagram post and we were just absolutely blown away by the response. And what we found interesting is if you told me 6 months before, this was going to happen, I would be I'll be in the prayer room contending every single day and fasting and I don't know, but what's actually interesting is we just found this incredible movement of prayer that began for Trudi. Yes. And God just brought these people, some who we'd known, some who Trudi had just met, who all of a sudden just turned into these incredible prayer warriors for her. Oh, there were moments where, that posture was hard to hold, and there were some nights where it just felt dark, and you just get the little. I think I've got burned into my brain the sound of Trudi's phone. You'd hear this ding, and on WhatsApp a message would come. I never forget. There was one day where we just really were down, and just these messages came in from Europe and Africa and America, and it was just this is incredible God, and I know a lot of people are struggling at the moment with disillusionment about the church, and we've seen leaders fall, and it just seems like more is happening, and corruption in the church and different things like that. But we have just had the most incredible, beautiful picture of this year of just God's people praying. So we didn't feel like we had to, I felt like God was saying to us, look after your family, look after yourselves. You got church, I know it's less for you, Trudi, but for me, the church. But it was just God's created an army to carry this. And weirdly, Trudi ends up sparking an incredible movement of prayer through this. And just providing there's a lot of bills and stuff, chests and stuff like this, and just people giving generosity, just unbelievable stuff. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So at this point of your journey, I feel like that's the word that is often used for cancer. So at this point, what would you say you've learned, or what are you reflecting on? What are you, what's most poignant for you at the moment?
Yeah. I think just that God is trustworthy, that God is faithful, and I think the way that God has revealed himself in my time and, Mark, our family's, experience and journey through this is that God has met us. It's not to say it wasn't easy, but he met us on the hard moments and went before and prepared. So he is faithful. So I think that prepares me to trust for whatever's next. And I think that the answer to prayer, like I often say to people, is just that it's peace that does go beyond understanding.
Yeah.
Like it really is peace that is not of this world. So I think that has been, apart from the healing, the big answer to prayer has been the peace that we have experienced and continue to experience. So, so God is good. I think I just wanted to share like a really key moment of revelation that the Lord gave me. As I said, we'd be reading Exodus and really for me, being taken out of these roles, it was this moment, like this wilderness experience. You know, suddenly you're in isolation, just having to go through chemo, watching the world go by, and everyone, you know, getting on with life. But I remember it was readjusting to the new life and the new perspective, and thinking, oh, I'm not gonna. You know, it was an element of grief of like, what was, I'm not going to be the same person, you know, I do have this shadow hanging over me for the rest of my life. And like kind of even coming to terms, does it mean I'll live less years, or, you know, all that kind of stuff. Sure. So anyway, I just had this really clear moment where I just sensed the Lord speaking to me, and he said, don't go back to Egypt. Don't grieve what was. Trust me that I'm taking you somewhere better. And I think that just doesn't make sense when it's like a cancer diagnosis or like, but it was just like that deep down assurance that God always has something better. He's always working for our good, and like it's like valuing that spiritual growth, that relationship with him over temporary suffering. Even walking with this, like, will give me an opportunity to lean into him. And so it's like choosing to lean in him and the spiritual blessing over any earthly sense of security. And like, as we know, that's actually false. Like Egypt is false. It's false security. And so the only true security is to lean into him. And so I've had a couple of revelations of like, God, it was these moments of like, is this a weird gift? Is it a weird gift that I have this perspective in life that I have to live in dependency on him, and I'd have those conversations with God. Is this a weird gift? And the other thing I would say, and I've shared this before as well, but just that he really spoke into my identity and my calling, and as someone who is called to lead prayer and champion prayer and to lead on the front line really, and to lead with someone with hope and to be someone who raises the banner. That's who he's spoken, you know, into my life in the past. And so he like, and that Psalm 23, a lot of people had the kind of words of encouragement from that passage of like, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And so like I can still walk even though this sort of hangs over me with that posture of hope. And he's spoken to me about being a person of hope, heralding hope. That's deeply to who he's called me to be. So in it, the Lord has spoken to my identity. He's given me hope. He's given me spiritual revelations, and he is taking me somewhere better. And so that's what I want to testify today and share, that he is faithful. He will meet you where you are, whatever that looks like. And I think that's given me an assurance. And I don't want to gloss over that this isn't hard. There were certainly days where you know, that pilgrimage is very underwhelming. It's boring and lonely. But just lean into his presence is my encouragement, and just hold on to hope that there will be a new season. And I remember like even there was this kind of another worship song that I was listening to, this present suffering, there will no need to worry, there'll be glory after this. So whatever that looks like, we have a promised eternal glory. And so leaning into the glory and the hope of glory is my encouragement. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Trudi. Man, doesn't matter how many times I hear this story. Thank you. Thank you for your encouragement and for the way that you walked it out and continue to walk it out.
Thanks, Liddy.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And thank you also, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, you walked it alongside. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we conclude?
I just think it's, as I've listened, I think this is, there's books on leadership you read and there's programs and stuff like this, but I just find so much of this thing of wrestling with what is it to be a Christian leader is actually this sort of stuff. Like, I don't know the manual, and I'm so privileged to have learnt from my wife in this, and so I just hope this has been encouragement. I'm encouraged. Listen to it again, and I lived it. So yeah.
Well, bless you all. We pray that you are encouraged, and thank you again for walking alongside. It's meant a lot. So that's Rebuilders for today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Trudi, in particular, for joining us on the panel. We'll see you next time.
Bye.